Good morning. Uh, it's a real privilege to be addressing this audience at this morning. Coincidentally, it's also my first day at work in my new job as the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Surpass. Medyo naninibago pa ako sa bagong title ko. But I think Chairman and CEO does have a nice ring to it, diba? When the organizers invited me to deliver today's keynote speech, they were not aware that I was starting my new job today. So, surprise, guys. I just hope that my new employer does not object to my being here because hindi pa ako nagpapaalam na pupunta ako dito ngayon. Okay. So, I was asked to make this keynote about business continuity. And how to move on with our businesses after 26 months of this pandemic. I mean, are we really already in a post-pandemic phase for our business history? I mean, we are certainly in the post-EDSA revolution phase of our political history. But from a business standpoint, post-pandemic na ba talaga tayo ngayon? Well, honestly, I don't know. For all we know, a new COVID variant or a deadly strain of the monkeypox virus could force us back into lockdowns. I sure hope not. So I see in this conference that you got like 7 themes across the 7 days. Let me just quickly go through these 7 themes with you and maybe raise some issues or questions that I might have as it relates to business. So day 1, we've got this without borders, security in the hyper-connected world. Well, we all know that cyber criminals are now infiltrating corporate networks at an alarming rate. There's an ever-widening attack surface among all of our servers that are online, and the threat landscape is only increasing. The cyber criminals now have AI and machine learning and all other tools and technologies at their disposal to penetrate our systems, and we have never been more vulnerable. So this is a very good topic for today. Day 2, secure the future with zero trust. How do you support and protect a hybrid workforce that is no longer 100% on premise and behind our physical firewalls? Cyber attacks did reach an all-time high during the pandemic because the people who were working from home simply didn't know how to protect themselves. Day 3, you've got data resiliency, essential guides. Data, as we all say, is the new oil, or as I like to say, data is the new gold. So the durability, stability, performance, and reliability of our IT systems are even more important because that's where the gold resides. So to ensure business continuity, we have to ensure IT systems continuity. Day 4, you have fast data, analytics, and AI, next frontiers and innovation. This new oil or this new gold that we call data, it's got to be mined and analyzed. So not only do we provide or extract historical insights to support today's business decisions, but also we can use it for machine learning and predicting the future. And the future is coming up real fast, like right now. Day 5, you've got automation in the digital economy, digitizing our policies and procedures into business rules so that our processes can proceed with minimal human intervention is becoming increasingly an imperative. Many of the day-to-day business decisions that are made are really binary in nature, and they don't need human intervention. You don't need a human being to approve a leave request. So why even have a human being involved at all? That's just adding more friction to the business. We need to equip our remote workers with tools that allow them to be even more productive in a work from home setup and allow the company to better track their productivity. In day 6, you've got enhancing experiences from digital to reality. Marketing professionals have long known that humans respond best to visual stimulation. So visual technologies are really changing the world of marketing and communications. Since the rise of digital marketing as the primary medium for communicating with customers, digital tools in multimedia have been the real game changers. From simple presentation slides to VR, AR, our ability to simulate, even replicate our physical world into the digital world, dare I say the metaverse, is becoming more possible with each passing day. And finally, on day 7, you've got into the cloud, how to succeed. You know, all of these advances in technology have been driven primarily by cloud adoption. From the early Web 1.0 websites, which were all read-only, to the current Web 2.0 apps, which are read-write, to the emerging Web 3.0 dApps, or distributed applications, with a growing adoption of blockchain technologies and cryptocurrency. None of these would have been remotely possible if it weren't for the massive migration of code and data to the cloud. So those 7 areas are a lot to digest, as was mentioned earlier. You know, it's kind of information overload. So I really do applaud you for taking on so much during the next 7 days. If you survive the next 7 days of this conference, you will certainly be a lot more educated and knowledgeable about these important topics than most people in the world. But for me, rather than drilling down on each of these 7 themes, I'd like to share some thoughts on a more strategic level. Okay? These past 2 years have been unprecedented in terms of the kinds of disruptions that we have seen, and companies are finding it nearly impossible to plan for the future. You know, such a volatile environment requires a new approach to devising strategy. The trick is on how to turn a world of uncertainty into a world of possibility that requires a change of perspective, a new mindset on the part of business leaders. We need a different approach to devising strategy, one that relies less on looking at what the company is doing today and more on managing or imagining what it could do tomorrow, and then doing whatever is necessary to make that possible, no matter how much it goes against past assumptions and established practices. So how do you do that? A favorite of mine, a favorite futurist of mine, is a guy named Dr. Jörg Esser. He's a German partner at the consulting firm Roland Berger. Really smart guy. Jörg has a very unique background. I mean, he's a technologist. He's a PhD in scientific systems. He's got a business management background, and he's a strategy consultant. So, you know, he's a technologist, but he's also a business strategy consultant. Now, fortunately for people like me, he has translated his work on emergence and self-organization into practical principles that normal people like me can understand. And he recently wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review on this very topic. So please allow me to quote directly from Jörg's article. It hardly needs to be said, but we live in uncertain times. The COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the reshuffling of global supply chains and capital structures, the past few years have seen unprecedented disruptions, and the turmoil shows little sign of letting up anytime soon. Challenges abound, and companies are finding it nearly impossible to plan for the future. So is it even worth trying to predict the unpredictable? Sure, uncertainties mean risk, but you know what? It can also mean opportunities. Handled correctly, it gives organizations the chance to expand beyond the boundaries of their current business and potentially into unexpected directions. The magic words here, of course, are handled correctly. Turning a world of uncertainty into a world of possibility requires a change in perspective, a new mindset on the part of business leaders like yourselves. Companies need a different approach to devising strategy, one that relies less on looking at what the company can do today and more on imagining what it could do and then doing whatever is necessary to make that possible. This must be done even when it goes against past assumptions and established practices. When devising strategy, taking a strict customer-centric view is critical. What is that? What is it that your customers really want? Rather than drawing up endless customer profiles, companies should consider what individuals want to achieve in a specific circumstance, something called the job that needs to be done. Equally important is involving the entire organization in the strategy development process. This is not an exercise to be carried out by a corporate strategy team working in isolation. Instead, companies should draw on the power of an adaptable organization to come up with ideas and allow solutions to emerge. Naturally, having the right skills in the right place within the organization is important, but the interactions between different individuals are often much more important than the individuals themselves. That's a very agile concept there. And the process of devising and revising strategy is continuous. You define the ultimate outcome that you want to achieve. You know, what military people call the commander's intent. Then adjust and adapt the strategy on an ongoing basis. In a military context, the goal may be to take a certain hill, but the strategy for achieving that end state is not fixed. The strategy is not, for instance, we will take that hill by crossing the bridge. Because, you know, in the real time of war, the bridge in question may no longer be there when you get to it. Likewise, in a business context, companies should define their goal, but not decide in advance how they will achieve it. Instead, they should rely on the experience they gain along the way and the collective genius inherent in the organization. This new approach in defining strategy is what makes it possible for companies to thrive in a fast-paced, constantly changing, and increasingly global market. But then again, how do we achieve this? Jörg Esser recommends a 4-step approach. Step 1, find the big question. The first step is to formulate the right question. The question that your strategy then seeks to answer. You know, Jim Collins talked about this in his big, hairy, audacious goals. We like to think this now as a big, hairy, audacious questions. The big question should be one that stretches your business to expand its value creation. Dreaming is not only allowed, it's encouraged. A key source of inspiration could be customer problems and desires, which are, of course, changing all the time. So rather than trying to discuss with each other and guess what customers want, a better idea is to ask them what problems or frustrations they have encountered, and then work constantly on solving those issues. You can also regularly ask other stakeholders, investors, government bodies, local communities, and naturally also your own employees for new ideas. Oftentimes, the ideas you're looking for will already be out there, but they may have been laughed off as being too far removed from current operations. I was recently involved in a consulting project for an airline that had long been aware that customer demand for flights was now much more volatile and fluid than in the past. However, because of the way major airlines' flights are scheduled across the industry, generally they had just 2 fixed flight schedules a year. This was restrictive in the amount of flexibility that they could offer to their customers. Rather than wondering how to tweak at the edges of the problem, maybe by offering 1 or 2 more schedules a year, we started at the other extreme of this very radical, with a very radical question. How can we offer flights on demand wherever and whenever the passenger wants to fly? The idea of on-demand flights did not come out of nowhere. Okay, it had cropped up on various occasions in the past, but always management dismissed it as being too far from their current core business and existing capabilities, which, like every other major airline, involved offering regular flights on fixed schedules. Everyone knew that offering on-demand flights could open massive opportunities, but the question of how to do it was just too big, too hairy, and too audacious by the managers who were in charge. Step 2, break it down. Okay, next, break down the big strategic question into subsidiary questions relating to different parts of your operations or business processes. This allows you to anchor the strategy devising process within the organization. Everybody will have a stake in it. It also opens the door to inspiration from outside of your own industry. Brainstorming, not brainwashing, brainstorming exercises can be incredibly useful, with the emphasis at the stage of coming up with new questions rather than searching for answers. That's key. You're looking for questions, not answers. In the airline project, we ran the big question by the various functional teams within the company, such as their network management team, the crew scheduling team, and so on, just to see what ideas that it might spark. More often than not, the response to the idea of offering on-demand flights was, hey, no way. Di yan pwede. Hindi na pwede yan. Imposible yan. We then asked, tell us why, bakit? Then they told us what the airline would do if it was to be possible. Like, eto kailangang mangyari para magawa yan. Well, that revealed some interesting information that we were not aware of before. So you see the trick? Rather than trying to win the teams over on this new strategy or this new idea, get them on board with the idea by asking them why it's not possible. People find it easier to answer that question, why not? And they can come up with all kinds of angles that you've not thought about. Better still, taking an idea that everyone thinks is ridiculous and going at it just for the fun, almost playful process. Play is a secret to creativity. Now, one of the questions that emerged from these discussions about on-demand flights was, how can we spot trends in demand for flights and adapt our capacity and prices accordingly? In other words, how could the company take data from the current activities relating to yield management, without which on-demand flights would never get off the ground from a business perspective, and predict future demand? You know what we found out? They already had all the raw data they needed to predict future demand. They just didn't know how to get at it and how to use it. Step 3 is to generate ideas. Now you start coming up with the ideas. The third step is to take each of the sub-questions and start the process of generating ideas and strategic options. Importantly, you now no longer think about the questions, adjust them, or ask if any questions are missing. You simply look for strategic ideas. And inspiration for the ideas can come from within the organization or outside of it by looking at what top performers in your own industry and in other industries are doing. This approach was particularly useful when we were working with this airline. For the big strategic question on how to offer on-demand flights, no external examples had existed. I mean, nobody else was doing it in the airline industry. None of the company's competitors were offering such a service. But when we looked at the sub-questions, we found plenty of examples. In the area of yield management, for example, there was already young companies effectively forecasting customer demand and adjusting prices accordingly for other means of transportation. Ever hear of Uber, Lyft, or Grab? Basically, these guys were already doing, basically what they wanted to do was a Grab for airlines. So step 4, identify the best options. Finally, you got to identify which strategic options from the previous step deliver the best answer to each of the sub-questions. Define what success will look like, envision that, and for that process in question, see it in your mind's eye. Then run the new solution in parallel to the existing one. Kind of like a ongoing parallel UAT. As soon as the alternative solution outperforms the incumbent one, abandon the existing process completely and do this not just once, but continuously as opportunities in the market change. Continually challenging existing solutions has far-reaching consequences for your strategy. For each process, ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, is this part of our current value proposition? And number 2, do we have the capabilities and resources to master this area? The point here is that you should only do the things for which you can answer yes to both questions. Everything else you need to either outsource by means of partnerships or even acquisitions, or you can spin them off. For the sub-question in the airline's yield management problem, it turned out that there was an existing retail ticket selling operation, a startup, that had an app. And the technologies required to forecast demand and calculate prices accordingly was already being done by them. But they were a competitor, right? These guys were competing with them. So what did they do? They decided to outsource that part, the yield management part and the repricing part for their on-demand flights to a company that was technically their competitor. That outcome would never have been conceivable if they were not asking the right questions. So when it comes to devising strategy, companies all too often get bogged down in their own current capabilities, fixating on the question of what they currently do and how they can do it better. Instead, I encourage businesses to look to the skies, maybe to the cloud, to open their minds and play with even seemingly ridiculous ideas in a fun and creative way. Follow these 4 steps and you may find that an idea you previously ruled out as impractical or overly costly suddenly becomes possible and profitable. I hope you found the 4-step process, this 4-step approach to developing strategy in an uncertain time to be helpful. You know, if you want to have a chat about it sometime, you can ping me on Facebook Messenger. I'm just on there, Joey Gurango, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the conference and have a nice day. Maraming salamat.